This is a brief presentation on the Ashtabula County Charter. We'll be going over the pieces one by one and just trying to focus on some of the major elements. Let's get started. One of the first things that comes to mind when we're doing this is, what is charter government? More or less, whenever some place wishes to go beyond the default form of their government to something a little bit more complicated, a little bit more customized to what they want, they need to enact a charter. This is often done with villages and cities, but it's a bit different with counties. Villages and cities routinely create charters to go ahead and let them customize their services. Counties all have a default type of government created by the state, which means that Ashtabula County has the same type of government as Butler County, Cincinnati, or Hamilton County by Columbus, even though these are very different entities, very different needs. And one of the advantages to a charter is that you can go ahead and customize to those needs. You say, well, Ashtabula is not a landlocked place, it is not a major metropolitan area, nor is it very rural. All needs are decidedly different than a lot of our neighbors. Now, another aspect of this is that one can use a county charter to essentially annex an entire county. And this doesn't happen, but for the most part, since it is allowed, it does cause concerns. We do this with all charter by having a clause, section 1.02, powers limited, that specifically bans any sort of annexation of property or powers of the villages and cities and townships inside the county. Now, when you are looking at a charter, you have a lot of options, as many as you can think of, so long as they don't violate the state or federal constitutions, that you can go with. You could have 9 council people elected by district, or 5 by district, 4 at large, and so on. You could choose to subdivide an existing office into 2 new ones. You could appoint an elected port authority as opposed to the one we have now. Those options that are available to us are almost unlimited, but ones that we've focused on are things such as term limits, nonpartisan elections, recall elections. And these are interesting because you cannot have them for your county unless you have a charter. So you may or may not want to have term limits, but you can't even have them if you have a normal county structure. You have to have a charter if you want to do things like that. If you want to be able to recall officials, you must have a county charter. One of the things we focus on with this is the concept of self-determination. When a nation gets together, it goes ahead and designs its own government. When a state exists, it has its own local constitution. Cities and villages do the same. They create their own charter. They don't have it designed for them from above, or at least they don't in the United States. And we don't know why that would not be the case with a county. The states had to have some sort of system in place to begin with, and those in the Midwest mostly subdivide themselves into counties, which are subdivided into townships, and use a very basic default form of government, many of which date back to when there were maybe 1,000 people in an entire county sometimes. And we do still have counties that only have about 10,000, 15,000 people in them. On the other hand, we have ones that have 1 million in them. These places all have different requirements, and we think that it's very important that people should be able to tailor their own county's government to meet those requirements. And that is coming back to this concept that each of these places should have their own unique government customized to their needs. As we said, we don't know why any county would not choose to do this as an option. And again, just discussing this concept, 50 states, 50 individual governments. In Ohio, we have 88 counties. We should have 88 individual governments. There is an advantage to standardization. A lot of times with places as small as a township, which could have a population of a few hundred, although there are some with populations of 50 or 60,000 in this state. You really can't devote the resources to designing your own unique and yet effective government. But there are 100,000 people in Ashtabula County. Now, that's more than a lot of countries on this planet actually have. There are some that have under 1,000 even. And we believe that that's a sufficiently large base, a sufficiently diverse base as well, to justify having our own tailored government and to actually be able to put one together. We believe that we have sufficient infrastructure, sufficient talent and resources to be able to do that. So we probably should do so. Now, each of these charters is unique. It's designed for the county, it's designed to be adaptable, it's designed to be adapted by the citizens at elections. And so let's discuss some of the things that make our charter unique. One of the big things we focused on was this concept of district representation. At the moment, we have 3 commissioners who represent the entire county. They could conceivably come from all the same place. They could all come from Geneva, or all come from Conneaut. And we don't think that that would be a good idea. That is not currently the case, but it could be. We think it is better for each of the major areas of the county divided up equally by population, in this case 14,500 people, to have their own representative. And as you can see here, we have 7 districts colored in on that map, that each of them have roughly 14,500 people. You'll notice by this map that this is a very contiguous map. There's very little gerrymandering imagery going on here. Everything looks exactly like it's supposed to, nice and compact. No strange bell shapes, nothing that looks like an inkblot Rorschach test. These are compact districts that represent communities. Now, what are some of the differences between the council and the commissioners? As you can see here, just going down this list, district representation guarantees every community is represented and has a distinct advocate. It's the same as with a state. States have 2 senators, like we have 3 commissioners, but they also have their own representatives. Every state has a number allocated to it, and those are where those congressmen represent. You wouldn't suggest that a state would have 20 representatives voted at large. It just wouldn't be advantageous to having them represent an area. So you do get that way a much greater diversity in terms of thought, in terms of perspective, and in terms of needs. Another thing that we focused on, both to save money and to come back to the core idea that people representing you should have a lot in common with you, is the part-time council. And we expect our representatives to remain in the private sector, to be small business owners, people who have a lot of skin in the local game, and that will help them to keep their perspective, we feel, because a lot of times if someone's in government for a long time, they begin to essentially to assimilate to the government, to see themselves more as part of the bureaucracy that runs things. And we want to do everything we reasonably can to prevent that. So having them as part-time not only saves us money, but it also makes sure that those representatives are constantly involved in their own communities. They don't have to stop being business owners or employees of the private sector. We also feel you can increase that by having non-partisan officials. Right now we elect people as Republican or Democrat, which essentially means that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party pick a candidate who represents their interests, and then we're stuck picking one of those 2 people. Which is not an unfair system in of itself, but we feel that it makes more sense to have somebody who is representing Geneva and Harpersfield, or Conneaut and Kingsville, than it is to have them representing the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. Another thing that we thought was very important was the concept of direct voter participation. Right now, we do not actually vote on things directly very much. We have representative democracy. We have that with Congress. We do not vote on tax rates. In the United States, we vote for the people who vote on our tax rates at that level. But many states, including Ohio, often have things on the ballot that we vote on directly. And just as we vote for our property tax levies, we feel at the county level it is actually possible for people to keep up with their tax rates and our expenditures. And we feel that since they can, we really should be getting their approval. So you cannot, with this charter, expect everything to go up for a vote by the people, but we've tried to set it up so that almost anything major does, and that includes any change to the charter. There are 3 different ways for doing that. The first is the council may place an amendment on the ballot. If the majority of the council feels that we should have the engineer become an appointed position instead of an elected one, they could put that on the ballot and we could vote on it. The other option is for the citizens to do it directly. They can circulate a petition equal to 10% of the number of voters from the last gubernatorial election, about 3,000 for the county usually. And if they get those signatures, then it goes on the ballot and we get to vote on it. There's also a decennial review commission, which will meet every 10 years, though it will also meet once a year after the charter goes into effect, who will hold public meetings and try to look at any sort of major overhauls of a minor nature that need to be put into place. Things you really wouldn't want to put up for an individual vote at an election, or you might have 20 or 30 things on each ballot. Now, the Decennial Review Commission also places them up on a ballot, and that's a thing we want to emphasize here. There are 3 different ways to get something onto the ballot, but they always have to be on the ballot, and they only go through if the citizens vote for them. Now, another aspect of this is sort of the flip side of that. The council needs to get approval to make any major changes or tax increases, but at the same time, they have a lot of leeway to function. We counteract that, place a check and balance on that, by making sure that anything that they do can be referendum by the populace. And that's the same as with above. You need about 3,000 signatures for our county to be able to do that. So we won't have people challenging everything trivial, but anything that is unpopular, you'll be able to get enough people to vote on it, to sign a petition, to put it on the ballot, and have it struck down. A big feature of this charter, we did not feel that any tax increase, mostly this is sales taxes, but any county-wide tax increase should be possible without a vote by the people directly. Right now, whenever somebody suggests one, we have to race out and get thousands of signatures to put a referendum on the ballot to prevent that from happening. Another thing we put on there after a lot of the school levies was to require that it only be able to be done during general elections. We had some school levies pass, you may have voted for or against them, this last year, that were done during a special election in August. The voter participation rate is always lower outside of general elections. We have as many as 45,000 people vote during a presidential general election. This spring, 2013, we had about 7,000 show up to vote. Sometimes in off-year elections there's nothing on a given area's ballot at all, and those people just don't have an election. But even then, you just do not see the same voter participation rate. Alternatively, the general elections, the voter participation rate is often 30 to 40,000, rising to, again, 45,000 in busier presidential years. And we don't like the idea of somebody able to put a tax on there during a relatively minor election or a special election. So we required that any sales tax increase or any county-wide tax increase had to go on the ballot, and only during those November general elections. Now, another feature is the nonpartisan elections. You can argue the merits of parties. They do actually have some, especially at state and national levels. But they really do not make too much of a difference at the local level, and we do feel that it tends to set up an environment that, again, makes a given representative there to represent the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party, not so much Geneva or Andover or Ashtabula City. And the two of them are always butting heads, and we'd rather they focused more on getting things done at the local level. With independent candidates right now, with partisan elections, they really don't tend to have much luck. If you see an independent candidate holding office, even at the relatively local level, it's typically because they either previously were part of a party and chose to leave, or they have a very large amount of name recognition or money to be able to get elected. We would prefer that all candidates were all effectively independent. Now, if they want to be a member of a party, that's fine. They just will not run on the ballot as a Republican or Democrat. And we feel right now that it tends to both force candidates to join parties, as well as to eliminate anyone who isn't a member of a party. And we think that's cutting out a pretty big segment of the population that could be good office holders. Now, county-wide offices are a little bit different in this model than what we would call the legislative branch. Right now, there are 17 elected offices in the county. With the charter, it changes over to 18. 6 of those are judicial positions. 3 of those are commissioners, and the remaining 8 of them are local positions specific to a job. The sheriff, the prosecutor, the coroner, the engineer, the auditor. Very few of those positions really have much to do with a lot of what you think of as partisan politics. Most of us would all agree that, again, abortion, gun rights, foreign affairs, these are very important issues. And voters often have a want to know and have a right to know what a candidate's view on these things is at the federal or even state level. At the local level, they really very rarely come into play. The engineer's position on abortion probably has nothing at all to do with him or her doing that job. And we think it just gets in the way with those specific positions where they're there to do a job rather than there to represent our interests like the council would do. We also decreased the number of actual county-wide job-specific offices. The auditor, the coroner, the engineer, the prosecutor, and the sheriff, plus the judges. And as we said above, there's really no reason why party affiliation should be relevant to the voters. Very little that they do is, or at least should be, connected to politics. A big problem with local elections, and one of the reasons why parties are attractive to more local candidates, even state level, is that they simply cannot get name recognition out. They tend to run on shoestring budgets, and they are not known to the voters. They can't really afford to be doing large amounts of TV ads or showing up on The Tonight Show to be introduced to the public. So they often need to join a party in order to become known to the public, and of course parties expect you to represent their interests, which is a legitimate thing to request if you've run for their party. We think that this is a dilemma that prevents us from getting a lot of potentially good candidates, and we're looking to avoid having that be the case. Now, we talked about the various positions that were job-specific. Prosecutor, fighting crime; sheriff, fighting crime; engineer, keeping the roads clean. Keeping the roads in repair. This is not the case with your district representative. That person is there to represent your broad and general needs. And that person is going to be representing about 15,000 people. Only about 4,000 or 5,000, maybe 6,000 of whom are actually going to be voting for them in a given election. Now, It's hard to actually contact that many people individually during the course of a campaign, but it is actually physically doable. And you do not need a particularly large campaign budget to be able to send each of them an individual letter, for instance. 50 cents for stamp and letter, you're going to need a campaign budget of a couple $1,000s. Right now, you need a lot more than that if you actually really wanted to be known to the county as a whole. And that is why it's very helpful to be part of a party, because you get that D or that R next to your name that tells a lot of voters, oh, I don't know this guy, but he's aligned to my general way of thinking. And so we feel that we can work with a small enough sample group that candidates to represent our personal interests can be known to the majority of their voters without having to rely on party affiliation to sway votes. Another problem that you do have with party politics is that it typically presents a one-on-one race, and that is what most of us tend to like. It makes things simpler if you've got two people running. But that's often not the case too. You can have 3 people running at a time. You often do have 5 or 6 candidates for governor from various parties, even though 3 or 4 of them might only get 1% of the vote between themselves. There are 15 or 16 registered parties in Ohio, for instance, everything from the Communist Party to the Natural Law Party. We don't want citizens voters to be swamped with tons and tons of candidates, so we go ahead and use those primary elections anyway, since we've got them for the state and they're going to be being held. We go ahead and use those to winnow down the pool a little bit. People put their name in sometime in the early spring to run for the office in question, and then if there's only 1 or only 2 of them running, they won't even appear on the spring ballot. We're already down to the number of people who will be on the final. If 3 or more people vote, there's an initial election, and the 2 who get the most votes will be in the general election that fall. And we're calling that a runoff race, which is technically a bit inaccurate, but accomplishes the concept. And again, as we said, if there's 3 or more candidates, the 2 who get the most votes will be on in the fall. There's also the option for a write-in candidate. We have no reason to want to change that, but it typically does not affect races if there's only 1 or 2 candidates. Now, as the county council itself, the county council serves for 4-year terms, and initially all 7 of them will be up for election. 3 of those will only serve 2 years initially before going on to serve a normal 4-year term after that, or to run for another 4-year term after that. And that will stagger them out. They are only allowed to serve for 3 consecutive full terms, which means 12 years, although those initial 3 who had to run for 2-year terms, they would be allowed to serve up to 14 years, same as somebody who took the position over for somebody else midway through their term. So it's 3 consecutive full terms, and that does also mean that if they left the office for 4 years, they could come back and run for it again 4 years later. We want to make sure we don't have people as lifetime politicians, but at the same hand, the non-consecutive ability there does allow a place to select someone that they really like and want to keep in there. That kind of force them to pick somebody else for 1 term, and if after that time they really did like the original guy who'd served 12 years, they can go ahead and put him back in for another 12 years. Now, as the county council's compensation, that's just $12,000 per year. Currently, commissioners individually earn $60,000 per year plus benefits, which are pretty significant when you get into pensions and medical. That means the county council, for the most part, is costing us as much for all 7 of them as 1 commissioner currently costs. This is not accidental. We could have taken the current commissioner's salaries and benefits and just multiplied them by 3, then divided them by 7, kept the same pool. But while we did want to make sure we paid the council so that they would not have any incentive whatsoever to perform their jobs, have their expenses paid, we really did not want to have the salary very high on this. Again, we discussed this earlier. We're looking for people who are there to try to help out the government based on their private sector experience. We are not looking to create career politicians. Maybe you need that at the federal level. You might really need years and years of experience to get anything done. But these people are not here to individually run the government on a day-by-day basis. That's what we have our bureaucracy for. They're here to be a check on that bureaucracy and to explore new ideas and concepts. And we feel that part-time is just more advantageous for making sure that they have the ability to do that out-of-the-box thinking. It's hard to think outside the box when you all live in the same box, which is to say that you all work 9 to 5 at the local government office. Now, the council has no direct authority over the other elected officials, and that's an important difference to make. A lot of counties, when they enact a charter, they essentially put into place a county council, with or without an elected executive, and that group is in charge of everything. We didn't think that was a good idea. We don't see the need for quite as many checks and balances as you might have at the federal level, but we still wanted to make sure we had them. The sheriff, the prosecutor, the auditor, these are people who could easily find themselves in very direct conflict with the county government. You really don't want your auditor to be auditing his boss's books. So we didn't extend them any new powers in that respect over those offices. We'll get to some other offices that are currently elected that we made appointed and why later on. And as we said, we are not looking for a council that is going to micromanage this government. So another advantage of them being part-time is they're not likely to have a chance to get bored and start looking for new things to do in terms of micromanagement. As we were saying, some places, when they have a council, they go ahead and have a co-equal executive branch, the same as the governor or the president is to the state legislature or Congress. We did not go that route. We felt that an appointed administrator that was underneath the existing council would be the best option for us, at least for the current time. The county already has a county administrator subordinate to the commissioners, and we've basically just taken that position and gone ahead and modified it a little bit, but mostly just left it as was. The county administrator we want is an apolitical role. If we decide down the road that we want a county executive, a count if you would, in the same way places have a mayor or governor, that's an option that with the charter we can actually do. We have the ability to create that position, but we're looking for somebody who's going to oversee the day-to-day running of the government, not to actually be in charge. Similarly, some of our appointed positions and some of the government that is appointed as opposed to elected is not going to be under the administrator's oversight. They report to the council. The clerk of courts, the clerk of the council, the finance director and law director will all report directly to the council. Getting to the clerk of courts. Currently, we elect our clerk of courts. We felt that if there was a list of positions that most people are not really too likely feel needs to be elected, this would probably be one of the top ones. And every time you make an elected post, as much as we want to have positions be elected, every time we make one an elected post, it's dividing away attention of voters from other things. A lot of other states have far less elected positions than we do. Many other places, many countries, only have a legislature, even a local legislature, a state legislature. They only elect the legislature, and those people appoint everyone else. We think that's taking a little bit too far, but we also don't want to split the vote too much. In our opinion, the clerk of courts really does not need to be a position that is elected by the people any more than the head of the Bureau of Motor Vehicles or the Farm Bureau. So we thought, make it appointed by the council, but with the recommendations of the judges, and ensure that there are no duties connected to that position which are not related to the courts. The next one, and this is a new post, is the law director. the duties of the law director are currently part of the prosecutor's position, but law is a lot like medicine. They are specialties and focuses. People who become our prosecutors are there to be experts in criminal law in terms of investigating and getting convictions on criminals, and trying to decide which are the best ways to go about fighting, those cases. Really has very little to do with other areas of law. You do not go to a patent lawyer to get yourself defended for a felony. You do not see a contract lawyer about getting a patent. And so our prosecutor is going to have those duties removed to the law director's office that involve advising the council and other county government wings and subdivisions on non-criminal law matters. It's a pretty straightforward concept. The reason why those duties are part of the prosecutor's office to begin with is when we first became a state and started having these county offices, a lot of the counties did not have a lot of people. They might only have had one lawyer in the entire county. And while we were saying that law is a specialty by field, your average lawyer knows more about patent law than most of us do, same as your average optometrist knows more about brain surgery than you or I do. So you need somebody to act as a legal advisor, and that was just the most obvious person to do it. As these offices have expanded, it makes sense to subdivide them into their specialties. And the law director's purpose is primarily going to be, exactly as we've said, helping to deal with those non-criminal matters, those civil legal matters that can pop up and end up costing the county or townships an awful lot of money. We would like to say that it's going to pay for itself, but we don't like to make promises on that score. Now, we expect this to save the county money. There's no easy way to analyze how much that would be. But a township that ends up getting itself sued for $500,000 or stuck in some contract that's costing them 10% over is going to rapidly start adding up money that could be saved through the law director. The finance director is the next appointed position, and is appointed by council. What we're doing there is merging in the duties of the county treasurer and recorder, as well as some of those non-court related functions of the county clerk of courts that we mentioned earlier. As we said, the clerk of courts will only be overseeing the functioning of the courts, and currently does have some duties that are not related. Now, the treasurer and recorder do not really have any duties that really represent a check and balance on the council. Those that are related to that, well, part of the auditor's office, and the auditor will serve as the check and balance on the council. The recorder, the treasurer, you can make a case for these being elected offices, of course, but again, you can make that same case for the local dog catcher or the deputies as opposed to just the sheriff himself. And we do not see a overriding need to have these as elected positions. So this has been another discussion about the charter. We thank you for listening, and we hope you'll vote yes on issue 1 this November. Thank you.